Are we losing the battle against global poverty? Is foreign aid a waste? And does it contribute to overpopulation? Our guests today, Bill and Melinda Gates, answer an emphatic no to all three questions. They join us this morning from Seattle. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, so the two of you have written a piece for the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, and your foundation releases its annual letter today. And in both of these, you want to combat these myths, these destructive myths. So Bill, let's start with you and the first myth. Isn't it just realism to have the view that a lot of people in America have, that the poor around the world are pretty much doomed to stay poor, that we haven't made much progress there?
Yeah, I think it's easy for people to be confused about that because they often see pictures of poor countries and they think, wow, we're rich, they're poor, and it seems like a constant. However, the wealth of those poor countries has been changing. Many that you would have thought of as poor are now middle income. Brazil, China, Thailand, so many countries moving up. And it really is an amazingly positive story that's taken place just in the last generation. And in fact, I predict in the letter that we'll have almost no poor countries within the next 20 years.
Well, so what are some especially impressive cases, especially places that you visited, say, 2 decades ago and where you're active now through the foundation?
Melinda and I were in Mexico City in 1987, and you could see people carrying water jugs around, and it was really quite a bleak environment. So when you go back now, you can say, wow, this is a city with mostly middle-class people here. And so actually Mexico's rich enough that they're self-sufficient. They don't receive a lot of aid. We're not having to put our resources there. We're putting it into countries that are moving up, have a chance of becoming self-sustaining like Mexico. And so most of the world's population now is middle income. The about 2 billion that are still poor, we can help most of those in a very defined period of time by having the right programs.
Well, so speaking of these programs, there's this whole question of foreign aid, and this is the second myth you want to deal with. There is this common impression that foreign aid is ineffective. It leads to corruption abroad. It creates a kind of economic dependence. So is this view so wrong?
Well, certainly if you just focused on headlines, you'd see a lot of stories about aid programs that don't work. Often they're actually taking a very small piece that was misdirected. For example, in Global Fund, a 2% piece that was misdirected. The Global Fund found itself and not really highlighting that 98% that gives you large effectiveness. The ability to understand how to measure outcomes, the world has gotten a lot better on that. After all, Melinda and I are very analytical. We want to make sure the money we're giving has big impact, and we've chosen a lot of these aid-oriented programs for the foundation's focus. So the answer is that aid has a lot of great hits, and overall it's very valuable, even though there are some cases that it hasn't achieved its goals.
Now, you seem to think it's especially effective in certain key sectors. Where do you think the great successes of foreign aid have come?
Well, health and agriculture are the two that really are enabling, allowing kids to be healthy so they can learn and contribute, allowing the farming sector to give that nutrition and free up labor for other activities. Those are the two most catalytic.
So Melinda, to turn to this third myth, the overpopulation myth, this is a special concern of yours because of your interest in reproductive health. So tell me, what's the problem with this view of things?
Well, it's particularly my interest because of my interest in women and girls and the economic opportunities that they can have to lift their families up. And as I've traveled around the globe, for over a decade now, and I meet these women, they want access to contraceptives. They know about them, they're educated about them, and they say, why can't I get them? And when you look at the global statistics, what you start to realize is that we have 200 million women who would like to have access to contraceptives who don't. And the reason I wanted to write this myth, though, is when I come back to the U.S., people will say to me, after they've talked to me for a while, they'll say, but if you and Bill are, saving these children with other partners through vaccines, aren't we going to overpopulate the planet? That's a belief in the United States. And the reason we have that myth that persists is that Paul Ehrlich was very successful with his book in 1968, The Population Bomb, telling people we're going to overcrowd the planet, we're going to overpopulate the planet. When in fact, when you look at what's happened since the late 1960s, country after country where women are educated and have access to contraceptives, they'll naturally bring down the birth rate of their children as more of their children live.
Well, so let me ask you, both of you, really a broader question. You've, in the past, with your annual letter, talked about the activities of the foundation. Here, you're trying, I think, to shape opinion about the sort of work you do. Why is it important to do this? What effect do you hope to have?
Well, these myths it's understandable why people might believe them. If they do believe them, then they would think the work of our foundation really is a waste, as well as the government aid programs going after those same areas. So we decided to take and just really drive home that these are beliefs that don't have evidence. In fact, the evidence on the contrary side is why we're so excited. We want people to be more upbeat, more committed, more talking about how to do this stuff better.
Well, now also, and I think you're very candid about this, you do have a kind of agenda policy-wise in that you think it would be good for the U.S. and other Western countries to contribute more in foreign aid. So can you talk a little bit about how the foundation works with government programs? Because many people consider them to be these very separate things, and they think, oh, the Gates Foundation is business-oriented and effective, and then we have all these government programs that are hopeless failures and corrupt.
Well, so let me give you a specific example. We work on the ground in Ethiopia with a whole host of partners on health for women, children, and men. And it's because the Ethiopian government has built out their primary health care centers, these little health posts, 15,000 of them around the country, staffed with 2 women each, 30,000 healthcare workers. And what we do in partnership with people like USAID and UNICEF, who helps bring vaccines, is we each do our piece in supporting that primary health post, working with the government of Ethiopia to say what are the life-saving medicines that women and children and men should have that we know will bring down the childhood illness and the childhood mortality in those countries. So we work side by side, and we actually critique each other's work. And if we see a supply chain issue where medicines aren't flowing or vaccines aren't flowing, we flow that information back to one another.
Well, okay, one final point here, though. So we're seeing tough economic times here in the U.S., in Europe. Lots of people out of work, pressure on government spending. Don't we spend already entirely too much of public funds on foreign aid? And can we really afford to spend any more, as important as it might be?
Well, the United States spends a bit less than 1% of its budget on foreign aid. And I'd say of all the parts of the budget, that's where you can see the impact. Millions of lives saved, countries being uplifted to become self-sufficient. So I wish we would spend more. There are European governments that spend a bit over 3% of their budget. And so we're nowhere near the most generous. But people should feel good about what we're doing. And they should look at the partnerships we have with the government and see, are we getting smarter? Are we doing this the best way possible?
And I think Bill points out in his part of the annual letter in foreign aid, when we see the Global Fund working, I mean, the difference in what's happening on the ground in Africa, people sleeping under bed nets, children sleeping under bed nets. Mothers will tell you, we're not seeing malaria in our community. We used to see it 6 years ago. That's a difference because of the Global Fund. And that's why we feel so strongly to make sure that that money continues to flow, because we meet the people, the families who are actually affected by it.
Very good. Well, your annual letter is sure to provoke lots of discussion and maybe even some change. So, Bill and Melinda Gates, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
For Wall Street Journal Weekend Review, I'm Gary Rosen.